So this is Mistakes I Made with My Self-Published Book Covers by Peter Derk with LitReactor. All right. I've committed the worst sin of self-publishing. No, not failing to hire an editor. Well, okay, I did that one too, Peter says, a bunch of times. No, not falsely representing myself to try and get my books on digital platforms used for library checkouts. Wait, I totally did that one, and I won't apologize. I must confess, I made my own covers. If you get one piece of advice about self-publishing, which you won't, you'll definitely get way more than one piece, totally unsolicited. But if there was an award for the most common advice, it would be this: don't make your own covers. What most people won't say is why this is a bad idea. You know, beyond the generic, they look crappy. What is it about a homebrew cover that just doesn't fly? How do people pick them out immediately? What are the mistakes that I made? How can you avoid repeating them? Now, I kind of fall on both sides of this. Typically, especially anything that's going to be published broadly or on Amazon, I pay somebody to make a cover for me. There are a couple platforms, including Godless and some others, that are purely ebook platforms where I design my own covers to save a little money, because those books are sold a little bit cheaper. And so there are instances where, like on a reprint or something like that, I'll do a cover myself. But those are rare occasions, and I usually go pretty simple. Most of my books I pay an artist to create a cover for me. All right, right now versus right. The excitement of self-publishing got the best of me more than once, Peter says. So I'd make something right now instead of making something that was right. An ugly cover is like a crime. Sometimes you'll get away with it in the moment, but there's no such thing as getting away with it forever. Instead of making a cover quickly, make it right. You're self-publishing. Nobody is going to remember if you blew your self-imposed release deadline because it took you a couple extra days to get a cover. Everyone will remember the cover if it sucks. I agree with that 100%. All right, not picking a theme. John Swartzwelder has some fairly boring covers, but he's got a standard, and damn it, 15 or so books in, I can't help but get excited when I see a new one. Amanda Lovelace changes out titles and colors, and other than that puts out the same cover over and over. For a self-published author working in one genre, a certain uniformity isn't the worst idea in the world. If you don't like screwing around with covers, work hard on a single nice template, change out the title and some colors, and call it a day. Given the choice between 10 unique ugly covers and 10 samey but decent covers, put me down for decent for once. All right, so that's not necessarily bad advice. All right, the tools matter. You can make a cover on Microsoft Publisher, but don't. It's been like 15 years since my first self-pub, Peter says, so I have an excuse, but you don't. You can jump online and find options that'll give you Photoshop quality in terms of pixels per inch and much better font and design options than Microsoft's design program, which really doesn't even fulfill the aesthetic needs of a B+ Lost Dog poster. He doesn't have a high opinion of that. I've never used it. I know it seems like there's a high barrier to entry on some of these programs, but those barriers to entry can also be called competencies, or maybe features of the program required to produce a decent product. I've been using Canva a good bit. I use it to create my thumbnails and things that I use for Twitch and for YouTube, and I've used it to make a couple covers for, again, the ebooks that go on singular platforms and aren't released widely. All right, using Kindle Cover Designer. Again, just don't. I've heard a lot of bad things about Kindle Cover Designer. The cover creator is the most underwhelming feature of publishing on Amazon. I would love to start an award, a challenge to use only the cover creator and its built-in assets to create a cover that doesn't suck. If you think those covers look fine, take a cover you designed over there and remake it using a better tool. As you go, you'll tweak a bunch of stuff that's not tweakable in the cover creator. And you'll see how those little options make all the difference. It's also a red flag for I'm self-published. Wear your self-pub status as a badge of honor, but don't wave it as a red flag. Again, I haven't used that program, but I've heard a lot of people that do not like it and do not rely on it. When you make your own cover, not evoking the text, sorry. When you make your own cover, you are mega familiar with the book's contents, not just the surface plot level stuff. Use this knowledge to create a cover that's enticing and interesting to new readers, and also evocative to people who have finished the book. Now, that was an interesting point when he brought that up. When I was first reading this, that kind of struck me. The fact that the cover's not just to pull people in, but if done well, it can be evocative to people who've already read it. Like, it's something that sticks in their minds. And I think that's important too. Your understanding is much deeper than that of a hired gun, so capitalize on that. It's one of the few advantages you have over a pro. All right, next, not mimicking good covers. You don't have to use a knockoff as your final cover, but just like the way you learn storytelling by writing like your favorites, learn how to make covers by designing like your favorites. Find a cover you love and remake it. Again, not as your final product, but as a learning tool. That's something I'd never considered before, and it's not a bad idea. Looking only to books for inspiration. When I'm stuck, I check out the greeting card aisle. Greeting cards have weird layouts, mess with color in big ways, and might bring you an inspiration that's unexpected and still pleasing to look at. And they're of similar proportions, dimensions to a paperback book. So you can usually scale the design. T-shirts can work. Candy packaging. Look outside the book for ideas and take pictures. Save ideas you can come back to later. I had never considered that, but again, that's another great idea in this article, and obviously part of the reason why I'm sharing it. Don't assume people are in on the joke. Sometimes I'd make a silly cover for a silly book, which makes sense in a certain way, but in another way, it's insane. You could get away with this if the book showed up in a bookstore or a library, because something about a legit binding, an actual physical object you can hold in your hands, something about that works if you have an intentionally bad cover. But online, nobody is going to know you know that the book looks ridiculous and that this is intentional. Going to the shitty on purpose route is a mistake, even if that matches the book's theme. On the other hand, John Conrath takes everything I just said and shoves it right back in my stupid face, so what the heck do I know? All right. Using unaltered images, stock images. Funny thing is, this stock image on here I've actually used before, not for a book cover, but for a thumbnail. If you use a stock photo or image, especially a free one, be aware that there's a good chance it's been used before, and there's a good chance it'll be used again. If you use a free image, make sure to alter it in some way so that only someone who peruses this stuff a lot will recognize the image. For the love of God, don't put something like typewriter or bookshelf into a free picture site and use something from page 1 of the results. Not for a book cover anyway, I guess. Abiding by all the rules. The rules exist for a reason, and a lot of reasoning behind the current rules of cover design exist because of the ways books function as objects on retail shelves. You're self-publishing, so why bother making something for bookstore shelves where your book will probably never show up? Make something that looks good on a screen. Make something that looks good with a field of white behind it. Look at the colors and fonts on the website you'll use to sell and make something that stands out, Peter says. You're self-publishing, so you don't need to make something that is polite, clean, and generally not disgusting. Make something weird. Now, I will say, if you're publishing on Amazon, if you go with certain images or have a lot of blood on the cover or that kind of thing, or cuss words in the title or anything of that nature, it's going to be low in the algorithms, and you're not going to be allowed to advertise it. Now, that may not be important to a lot of people, but it is something to consider on Amazon. So weird is okay, but if you're going to go with disgusting, you got to be careful if Amazon is your primary selling site. You don't have to put a publisher logo on there. You don't have to devote a certain percentage of space to your name, and you don't have to ugly up a nice design with a blurb if you don't want to. I think all of that is good. I would say that in terms of it not needing to look good on shelves, I understand what he's saying. If you design specifically for the screen, then you may have an advantage because that's where a lot of your sales are going to be. I go to a lot of conventions too, so I like covers that look good and draw attention on the convention table. All right, lastly, from Peter about sins or mistakes of self-published covers. Listening to people who decree that self-pubs must hire pros. Now, I'm going to need to make a bias here. I do hire pros, and the books that have covers made by a professional, the artists that I use look very good, and they do stand out, and I get complimented on them, and they get sales. So I'm a fan of hiring pros, but we're going to give Peter his say since this is his article. I've experimented with roasting my own coffee, with fixing my own car. I've experimented with circular saw. I've tried out all kinds of stuff, more complicated and with a much higher risk level than making a shitty book cover. No matter how bad you screw up a book cover, you get to hang on to all your fingers. So I get his point here that the risk of making a bad cover is low. You can always make more. You can always change it. So it's not a bad skill to have. And like I said at the beginning of this, I do make my own covers for certain platforms. So I guess I'm kind of a hybrid author, not only in how I write and publish, but how I do covers. I do lean heavily on professionals, though, because they always make something better than I can. It's just the investment of money, I suppose. But you do get what you pay for in terms of art sometimes. When someone tells you can't do that, when you're discussing a matter of taste, like making your own cover, what they're really saying is, I wouldn't do that. Yeah, you wouldn't. And if you're unwilling to accept that small level of risk or to understand that someone else might, I'm betting that all the pages between your slick, well-designed cover reflect that risk-adverse mindset. Now, I do think that's a little unfair, but I will say people who give advice, especially unsolicited advice, on a way somebody's doing something, they need to be taken with a grain of salt, because my rule on advice is I don't take advice from people who don't like me, don't like what I do, or don't care whether I'm successful or not. If anyone falls into any of those three categories, I specifically don't take their advice. Now, it doesn't mean I wouldn't read an article or something else and glean what I could from it, or listen into a conversation and take what I can from it. But when you get into the category of advice, especially unsolicited advice, those three things are kind of important. And it doesn't mean that you only take advice from your best friend or your families. I wouldn't say that either. But those are kind of three filters, three red flags for me. If the person doesn't like me, then I can't trust their advice, because they probably don't have my best interest at heart. If they don't like what I do or don't respect what I do, like if a person hates self-publishing and thinks it doesn't count, then I'm not going to take advice on how I'm publishing from that person, because they don't respect or like what I do. So it's not even a calculation of does it work or what money's involved or what are best practices, but it's about the problem. It's about them trying to push away from a format. And then lastly, if a person has zero interest in my success, then I need to be careful about accepting their advice. Oh, the bots have made an appearance, so I'll need to get rid of those in just a moment here. All right. You can make your own cover. And yeah, you'll make mistakes. And when your mistakes take the form of art for public consumption, you'll probably hear about those mistakes from people who aren't all that nice. But you'll still have all your fingers, including the middle ones, which you can use to express how you feel about being bossed around by cowards. All right, so he's coming down on the pro of making your own covers, but he's also saying that he would be careful of certain mistakes that he's made in the past. All right. Okay, so that's mistakes I made when my self-published book covers by Peter Derk with LitReactor. Again, LitReactor is a great source for information dealing with all sorts of things about writing.